It's the Moby-Dick read-along dream, presented by robinsongreads.
Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of our Moby-Dick read-along. It's chapters 11 through 20 today. As I'll ask in every episode, how are you doing? How are your chapter readings? I hope very good. These chapters were, I think, mood-setting chapters, ominous chapters, delicious chapters, as we'll see in the chapter entitled Chowder. I really enjoyed these, and I'll say that for probably every single part of this book, but I won't be able to say for every part of this book that I understand them. I'm understanding a lot of what's happening right now, but I'm getting biblical references that are just going over my head, over my shabbily haircut head. I gave myself a haircut recently, and it's a little uneven, but it's fun to do. But enough about my haircut style and routine. Let's jump into Moby-Dick. I'm going to grab my pillow, and we're going to tuck in and talk about the best book ever. So, we're beginning today with having just concluded with A Bosom Friend, where Queequeg and... actually, I don't believe A Bosom Friend was the very last one. Yes, we did conclude with A Bosom Friend. And Queequeg and Ishmael are cronies now, are loving pairs. And in Chapter 11 begins thus. Remember, we've just left them literally cuddling with one another in a wonderful scene of friendship. And someone pointed out perhaps more than friendship. I want to say right now that we're definitely going to get into the homoerotic subtexts of Moby-Dick. I myself feel, and this is just my feeling, that Ishmael's relationship with Queequeg is really a deep, loving companionship, more than it is some sort of wink in the eye at homoeroticism. That's just my feeling, reading it. I can, of course, find the fun in it, maybe the gay fun reading that you could approach this book with. But I think that's a real reading that can be gleaned from other chapters of the book, so we're going to get to those later. For now, we'll begin with this. I think I'd like to always read to you just the opening paragraph of whatever new chapter we're reading. Chapter 11, Nightgown. We had thus lain in bed, chatting and napping at short intervals, and Queequeg now and then affectionately throwing his brown tattooed legs over mine, and drawing them back, so entirely sociable and free and easy were we. Wow, I love that so much. He's, just throwing his legs over playfully. If any of you, I hope everyone has at some point or another, whether it was romantic or not, cuddled with a person and just kind of thrown your limbs over each other. It's just such a wonderful, great way to spend the morning. When at last, by reason of our confabulations, what little nappishness remained in us altogether departed, and we felt like getting up again, though daybreak was yet some way down the future. And part of the joy of Queequeg and Ishmael's relationship is something that I believe I mentioned in the last video, but I might have mentioned it in an earlier take of the video and then done another take later. I normally do these in one take, but I have a sinus infection right now, so sometimes I get like sneezing fits and can't breathe and I have to stop and I have to redo it. But I maybe mentioned this and maybe not, but relationships that are international, where you can't bring any of your cultural expectations to the table because they simply can't be met. You know that if you expect your friend from China or your friend from anywhere, pretty much, that's not your own culture, if you expect them to be able to read the room and play the game in the way that you've been raised, you're just expecting the wrong thing out of a person. And I think they tend to feel the same way. And you end up with this mutual relinquishing of any weird expectations about how long you should maintain eye contact or how close you should stand in. You can really just get to know a person more intimately. At least I feel that way. And I think Ishmael and Queequeg's relationship is a great example of their difference in cultural backgrounds, allowing for a different kind of intimacy. I don't want to say it's a deeper intimacy than one shared between two people of the same culture, but there's something special about it, something different. And it's just wonderful that it comes up, throwing their legs over each other like that. He even mentions that with a white man, he would have been skeptical of Queequeg putting his head against his head and saying, "We are now married." in the sense that your lot is my lot, and we are going to share money, lifestyle, whatever. But he felt that it was honest with Queequeg. And then we get this incredible description of what it feels like to lay in bed while it's cold and chilly on the outside and you're warm and snug on the inside. And before I read this bit to you, I want to share a little wonderful thing. As I'm going through Moby-Dick, I'm remembering where I was periodically at every chapter, where I was in my life. I guess this would have been 2 years ago. Heaven, it's 2 years ago? Maybe it's just 1 year ago, who knows? I think it's just 1 year ago, actually, yes. But where I was 1 year ago over the summer, over the end of my school year, and then starting the summer, and I read this chapter and this paragraph while I was in a dining hall, and it was the moment when I realized that I was really connecting with this book. I'd really liked it before then, but then it started expressing these ideas that I felt were in me that I'd never felt in another person's brain or in a novel or whatever it is. So here it is. We felt very nice and snug, the more so since it was chilly out of doors. Indeed, out of bedclothes too, seeing that there was no fire in the room. The more so, I say, because truly to enjoy bodily warmth, some small part of you must be cold. For there is no quality in this world that is not what it is merely by contrast. Nothing exists in itself. Whoa. Wow. We can go into that. But if you flatter yourself that you are all over comfortable and have been so a long time, then you cannot be said to be comfortable anymore. And you know what? The funny thing about this is that this, I'm sure, as it is today, and I'm sure it was back then, is sort of just like almost a tautology. We all know that if you're really totally comfortable all over, you don't feel it. You're not conscious of it. And yet he puts it so well in the subsequent sentences. But if, like Queequeg and me in the bed, the tip of your nose or the crown of your head be slightly chilled, why then, indeed, in the general consciousness you feel most delightfully and unmistakably warm. For this reason, a sleeping apartment should never be furnished with a fire, which is one of the luxurious discomforts of the rich. The insight that he brings to that, a luxurious discomfort. Wow, is that just not all around us all the time? I mean, I haven't even given it any thought before this video, but so many things in daily modern life that especially prioritize above anything else convenience end up having drastic, catastrophic consequences. The convenience of eating a burger quickly is the suffering of billions of animals being slaughtered every year and held in torture chambers, just for convenience. The convenience of being able to do everything you want all the time on a cell phone is that you never have any attention at all where you are at any point in your life, and you can never be present again. That is the sacrifice that most of us just end up making, or maybe not really end up making, but that we're just kind of cajoled into or born into by our cultures. And it sucks. It's terrible. Luxurious discomforts are all around us. And Eldar Zosima and the Brothers Karamazov has some wonderful things to say about fasting and how seeking discomfort really is great for the good life. By the way, I'm not myself a religious person. I was born in Alabama, a very religious place, and I followed the very stereotypical path of a young man who gets into Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and becomes a militant atheist, and then goes on and just starts meeting people from around the world, and then kind of, I like to think, mellows out a little bit. And now I'm hopefully, like I said, I like to think, at a curious place. But let's continue. Wow, I'm digressing a lot already. For this reason, a sleeping apartment should never be furnished with a fire, one of the luxurious comforts of the rich. For the height of this sort of deliciousness is to have nothing but the blanket between you and your snugness and the cold of the outer air. Then there you lie like the one warm spark in the heart of an Arctic crystal. What a wonderful sentence. And again, it just goes to show, you can say all you want, oh, you have to be kind of uncomfortable to be really comfortable. And, I can nod and move along. But if he hadn't written the words, then there you lie like the one warm spark in the heart of an Arctic crystal, it wouldn't have gone to my heart in that way. I don't know how great writing or great art or artfulness, whatever you want to call it, does it. And yet the truth of that hits me so much more. Does it for you? I don't know. But it does to me. Anyways, and so they're lying in bed, and Queequeg at some point or another ventures to tell Ishmael his history, how he ended up as a Polynesian man in the white man's world of whaling, or at least the Nantucket world of whaling in this case, which in a way is not a white man's world. It's a very international world, as we'll see as we go along. But needless to say, Queequeg is living among a lot of white people. How did that happen? And then we get his story. He's born on Kokovuko, an island. Oh, this is a great sentence. An island far away to the west and south. It is not down in any map. True places never are. And Ishmael sometimes gives us these absolutist phrases that punch, that feel really good, and that, upon further inspection, yield interesting thought processes. They don't always yield perfect absolute truth. I would not really go around saying these days that true places aren't on any map. But there's something about that. There's something about a true place. For instance, I was in Freiburg, Germany, and found an old, abandoned, beautiful, medievalish tower that had 3 green iron rung bars at the door that were easily accessible. You could just slip right through them. In America, the door would have been barred. There would have been security cameras, barbed wire, and a notice saying you can't trespass or you're going to get shot in the head. But in Europe, they don't have such a weird legal precedent of people trespassing, hurting themselves, suing, and winning in court. They're not going to give dumb people money, in other words. And so these really cool old abandoned places are just available for anyone. So I went up there, and there was this iron peg and a riot fence hung on it, and a ladder that went up 30 feet or maybe 20 feet into pitch darkness with dust in the air. And I don't know where I am. I'm all alone. It's night in the middle of Germany, probably around midnight, and I crawl up of it and reach an antechamber, go to the top, and then see a beautiful view of the whole city below me. And I'm in the Black Forest. And it was just an incredible solitary exploration experience of a true place that wasn't, this thing didn't have a name. Maybe it shows up on Google Earth, but it's a true place. And it's not down in the map, so interesting little thing. I hope that during this read-along you won't mind me sharing my little anecdotes, but I think that all we can provide when we're going through texts like Moby-Dick that have been analyzed to the ends of the earth is just talk about ourselves, talk about our own relationship to them and how we love them. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you want to send me an email. I've had some very wonderful email correspondences about this so far. Anyways, moving forth, we get to a description of Queequeg's heritage. His father is a king, which means Queequeg is a prince and a would-be king if he were to return to his island, maybe. There was excellent blood in his veins, Ishmael says, royal stuff, though sadly vitiated, I fear, by the cannibal propensity he nourished in his untutored youth. So Queequeg is a cannibal and has eaten human flesh. Interesting little note. We get a description of how Queequeg, in his desire to join a whaling ship, he was refused. So as that whaling ship left the harbor of his island, he hid in his canoe, and as soon as he saw it approaching out of the cove, he quickly paddled towards it, jumped on the ship, climbed up the ropes, with his foot turned over his canoe, sunk it in the water so he couldn't return, lashed himself to like a mast, and said, "I'm not moving, even if you hack me to pieces." It's just a wonderful way for him to enter the world. And of course, the captain, after a lot of screaming, says, "Okay, fine, you can join." And he starts his whaling, rise. I don't know what you'd call his career. But this is an interesting sentence we get on why Queequeg left. In Typee, Herman Melville's first novel, which is wonderful. And maybe we'll do a read-along of that, because maybe I'll just be the Melville guy on this channel, on this booktube, in Typee, I don't know if I want to say Melville, but the narrator of Typee gives a wonderful account of his experience with native Pacific Islanders who are cannibals, and just, a really wonderful, kind perspective for a very different kind of human as we're getting here. And one of the things that sticks with a person as they read a book like Typee is just how much of a paradise it is. It's not perfect, but it's a lot of the problems of the world that, Herman Melville was from are simply non-existent in Polynesian culture, in the Typee culture, and on the Marquesas. So why would Queequeg leave? Why would he leave this paradise? What does he want? Here's what we get. For at bottom, so he told me, he was actuated by a profound desire to learn among the Christians the arts whereby to make his people still happier than they were. That's a very kind sentiment. of Queequeg. That tells you something about who he is. Melville, oh my gosh, we're going to get this in these chapters. He's so good at characterization. He's economical, he's earnest, and his characters are so alive. It's just wonderful. Also interesting how he says, still happier than they were. They already were happy. Good thing to note there. Not Queequeg sought to enlighten his savage pagan culture. A lesser writer, probably many of Melville's contemporaries would have written that sentence, but Melville wrote still happier than they were. Just another wonderful thing. And more than that, still better than they were. But alas, the practices of whalemen soon convinced him that even Christians could be both miserable and wicked, infinitely more so than all his father's heathens. Another thing that we get, as we got earlier in the chapters, he says, I'll try pagan, friend, because Christian kindness has proved but a hollow courtesy. And one thing that's interesting is that I just spoke that to you from memory, and I've read that a couple times, but I didn't try to memorize that. It just sticks with me because it's so well written. And of course, maybe I'm wrong, maybe that's not verbatim, but so many little crystals in this book are going to be like that, where they'll just kind of stay with you, and if you give them a couple of reads, they won't leave. In the same way that I think, my own belief, the truth just has a latching power. I think if someone is exposed to kindly and gently, slowly to truth over time, that it can have nothing but a dissolving effect on evil. But it takes time. Anyways, why am I giving you my philosophical digressions? We're reading a book full of them by a genius, so let's just get down to his. Anyways, he says, arrived at last in old Sag Harbor, this is Queequeg, and seeing what the sailors did there, heaven knows what they were doing in Sag Harbor, and then going on to Nantucket and seeing how they spent their wages in that place also, poor Queequeg gave it up for lost. Thought he, it's a wicked world in all meridians. I'll die a pagan. Ishmael will give Queequeg's inner monologue often in Ishmael language, his own interpretation, which is wonderful, because sometimes we get Queequeg's dialogue and we get the same kind of vowel attachments to the end of words, like the double E that Queequeg speaks with, kind of similar how to, like, in Japanese, almost, there's actually only one sound in Japanese, the sound, the like nasal sound, that it ends without a vowel attached to it. So all Japanese sounds end in like fu, su, ba, ka, ri, no, ma. They all end in vowels, which is why a stereotypical Japanese accent includes vowel sounds after words that end in simply just inland consonants. So a lot of words in Japanese katakana, like backpack, are just going to be baku, paku. So Queequeg has that habit that we often get. Of course, in this very sensitive modern day and age, a lot of representations of the way people speak are stereotypical in ways that aren't very positive. But Moby-Dick, I think they're totally positive. Just my thoughts. But sometimes he doesn't give you Queequeg's speech. He gives you his interpretation of it, which I love. So there we get one. It's a wicked world on all meridians. I'll die a pagan. That must be what Queequeg thinks. And long story short, in this chapter, I don't know why I'm going to say long story short. We're here to spend time with this long story. Upon this, I told him that whaling was my own design, and informed him of my intention to sail out of Nantucket as being the most promising port for an adventurous whaleman to embark from. He had once resolved to accompany to that island, ship aboard the same vessel, get to the same watch, the same boat, the same mess with me, in short, to share my every hap. With both my hands in his, boldly dip into the potluck of both worlds. To this I joyously assented. For besides the affection I now felt for Queequeg, he was an experienced harpooner, and as such could not fail to be of great usefulness to me, or of great usefulness to one who, like me, was wholly ignorant of the mysteries of whaling, though well acquainted with the sea, as known to merchant seamen, Ishmael being a merchant in the past. His story being ended with his pipe's last dying puff, Queequeg embraced me, pressed his forehead against mine, and blowing out the light, we rolled over from each other this way and that, and very soon were sleeping. There are two things that I want to note here. First is a note on Ishmael's choice of Nantucket. I didn't touch on this in the last episode, but I wanted to ask you, do you feel drawn to places that have a sort of history or nobility around them? I have that in me a lot, maybe to a fault. When I got into music, I was drawn to classic albums because they felt grand and big and cool, even though I was enjoying them at first less than contemporary pop music that my peers were listening to. Much of it was also great. But I remember I just looked up like the Rolling Stone top 500 albums of all time, and at that time, before they redid the list, it was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So I gave it many, many listens. In the first 2 or 3 listens, I don't think I enjoyed it, and I don't think I even appreciated it. And around the 4th or 5th listen, I started to appreciate it, and then something clicked, and it just became an album I loved, and then I fell down the rabbit hole of music, and here I am, reading a book about whales. But I felt always a draw towards that big thing. Maybe it's the reason I felt drawn towards this book, Moby-Dick. I think it's good to have a sampling of all things, but the idea that Ishmael would be drawn to Nantucket because it has this history, and he doesn't want to sail out of New Bedford, even though he can, and it would be easier. I relate to that. I don't know why. So it's interesting. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that little ending paragraph where he describes Ishmael and Queequeg, well, Ishmael describes himself and Queequeg, just rolling over from each other. It's very short and a really gentle swaying way to end a chapter. And Melville's so good at that. Now, I can't remember from my experience reading it a year ago whether he ends all his chapters like that, but he definitely does in these early chapters. And if anything else, it at least shows you that he knows how to play the game. He knows how to play the writing game, how to write smoothly, how to segue. I wouldn't ever say that he gives it up totally in just so that he can express really crazy digressions and thoughts. I think he always has great structured writing throughout this. But here we get kind of classical narrative writing that is really satisfying. And then we get to chapter 13, Wheelbarrow, which is such a wonderful chapter. They essentially set out to go from New Bedford to Nantucket. And they're pulling this wheelbarrow, or pushing the wheelbarrow forward with their items like Ishmael's carpet bag. And Queequeg tells this just wonderful story of when he first shipped and landed in America, he was given a wheelbarrow for his possessions, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he just kind of tethers all of his stuff into the wheelbarrow, wraps it up, and then hoists the wheelbarrow onto his back and just walks through town because he doesn't know what a wheelbarrow's for. And Ishmael says, well, didn't people laugh? And then we get this wonderful story that I won't read from, but I'll just tell you, of Queequeg's description of a white captain visiting his island. And when a punch bowl of coconut juice is passed around to drink, the white captain, seeing the chief kind of dip his hands to kind of sanctify it. I don't know if that's the right word, but, to make it holy. He assumes it's just a washing bowl, and so instead of drinking from it, he just washes his hands in it, this white captain. And Queequeg says this, he says, now, what you think now, didn't our people laugh? And that's just so wonderful. We get both sides. Of course we do. It's Herman Melville, it's Ishmael, whatever you want to call it. We get the way that Queequeg has this funny, embarrassing moment in another person's culture and how a white person has it in his. And the point is not that either one of them deserves any mean-spiritedness, but both of them are kind of comical in their own lighthearted, humanistic way. I love that adjective, humanistic. I'm probably going to say it a lot. But I love that. I just love that that comes up. Anyways, and then we get this wonderful passage that does two things. I'll read it to you. At last, passage paid and luggage safe, we stood on board the schooner. Hoisting sail, it glided down the Acushnet River. On one side, New Bedford rose up in terraces of streets, their ice-covered trees all glittering in the clear, cold air. Huge hills and mountains of casks on casks were piled upon her wharves, and side by side the world-wandering whale ships lay silent and safely moored at last, while from others came a sound of carpenters and coopers, with blended noises of fires and forges to melt the pitch, all betokening that new cruises were on the start, that one most perilous and long voyage ended, only begins a second, and a second ended, only begins a third, and so on, forever and for aye. Such is the endlessness, yea, the intolerableness of all earthly effort. Wow, what a passage. For one, we get what I've heard two critics describe as journalistic immediacy. That's something that will come up with Moby-Dick text, in analysis, metatext. People will say that Herman Melville's one of his most early skills that he showed and developed within Typee and Omu, where it was his journalistic immediacy. But it's just true. He paints a scene. I used that word ekphrastic earlier to describe how Melville was able to describe works of art very well. But here we just get these huge mountains of casks piled up like mountains, and the ice-covered trees glittering in the clear, cold air, and then the sound. He's giving you all senses. I mean, maybe this is like a writing 101 class, but The funny thing about art is that you can follow every single principle in the book and it not work, because when it comes down to it, the only way a piece of art is really beautiful is just if it's working or not, and you have to develop an artistic instinct and spirit sort of to feel that and to kind of, I don't want to say come up with it, but allow it to move through you. I've never given a video on my whole philosophy on art and beauty, but maybe I will someday. I'm sure it's coming out in small ways like this. But we get that, and then of course, again, the Shakespearean insight. In this case, the insight of modern industry. Sometimes people will say of Moby-Dick that you can read it, or not even that you can read it, that it is a scathing critique of capitalism. And I gently say it can be. Why not? Why not a critique of capitalism? But this is a good one. One voyage ended, so begins another, such as the endlessness, the intolerableness of all earthly effort. It just occurs to me now that I don't really know how to pronounce that Y-E-A. I said, earlier. I don't know. It's biblical. And then he says, how I snuffed that tartar air. How I spurned that turnpike earth. I mean, he's just writing poetry. This is why people call Moby-Dick a prose poem. Some people say it's the only true prose poem. How I spurned that turnpike earth. Of course, he's just getting the alliterativeness in, and he has to be somewhat cognizant of that, but is he totally all the way through? Who knows? That common highway, this is the earth, that common highway all over dented with the marks of slavish heels and hoofs, and turned me to admire the magnanimity of the sea, which will permit no records. I love that idea. It's not perfect. It's not like a really deep idea in my opinion, but it's just nice. The earth leaves impressions. You can't leave a footprint in the ocean. It will permit no records. Now, of course, one thing that we're going to get to with this reading of Moby-Dick that we're getting to now is that the notion of the sea is very noble, and it remains today. The sea remains today, I would say, untamable, but not undefilable. I don't know if that's a word, but the sea we can leave our mark on the sea, and we have, and it's the marks that we have left are noticeable. You could just go out to the ocean and probably find plastic, or you can find oil gathered upon some islands, or whatever it is. Human impact has definitely probably made more, it'd been more lasting than Melville would have known when he was writing this. Who knows? But it's still an interesting idea, He spurns the earth, and he says, but the sea leaves no records. Just cool. And then they get onto the ship, Queequeg and Ishmael, and people are looking at them, kind of jeering at them that a white man would be friends with a cannibal, with a Polynesian savage. Of course, all the while, Ishmael's just thinking, I'm happy. I'm just with this guy. And Queequeg catches sight of a young bumpkin making fun of him behind his back. And Queequeg puts him in his place. And that place is on the floor by throwing him up in the air, twisting him, hitting him in the center. And the guy, of course, runs to the captain, classic. Captain, here's the devil. And the captain comes up and says, what are you doing? If you try to pull this you-know-what on me one more time, I'm going to kick you off the ship. He in fact says, if you try any more of your tricks aboard here, I'll kill you, so mind your eye. But it so happened just then that it was high time for the captain to mind his own eye. And basically, the prodigious strain on the mainsail with the wind blowing kind of, it parted the weather sheet, and so the boom, the kind of rotating arm extending out from the mast starts swinging back and forth, just knocking people off. People are ducking underneath it. And the very country bumpkin that just insulted Ishmael gets swept off into the ocean. See ya. I mean, most of the time, you're gone forever. Bye-bye. But of course, Queequeg, in the midst of the consternation, he dropped deftly to his knees, and crawling under the path of the boom, whipped hold of a rope, secured one into the bulwarks, and then flinging the other like a lasso, caught it around the boom and swept over his head. And at the next jerk, the spar was that way trapped, and all was safe. So he steadies the boom, and then he leaps into the water and dives after the guy who just insulted him. Wow! Shooting himself perpendicularly from the water, Queequeg now took an instant's glance around him. So he's in the water and he can't see him. The guy's drowning. And seeming to see just how matters were, dived down and disappeared. A few minutes more and he rose again, one arm still striking out, and with the other dragging a lifeless form. The boat soon picked them up. The poor bumpkin was restored. All hands voted Queequeg a noble trump. The captain begged his pardon. From that hour, I clove to Queequeg like a barnacle. Till Queequeg took his last long dive. Whoa. That's interesting that we get that there. Was there ever such unconsciousness? He did not seem to think that he at all deserved a medal from the humane and well, I'm having trouble with that today, magnanimous societies. He only asked for water, fresh water, something to wipe the brine off. That done, he put on dry clothes, lighted his pipe, and leaning against the bulwarks and mildly eyeing those around him, seemed to be saying to himself, "It's a mutual joint stock world in all meridians. We cannibals must help these Christians." So again, the Ishmael voice perspective of Queequeg. Wonderful. Then we get this wonderful chapter on Nantucket and the history of this island. So he even says, take out your maps and look at it. And I would encourage you to look at Nantucket on the map, because I have spent time on Martha's Vineyard. I one day biked the whole from Aquina to Edgartown and back of Martha's Vineyard, had an amazing time. And so I sort of thought that I had a notion of what Nantucket was like, but no. Nantucket is weird. Nantucket is different. It's much farther offshore than Martha's Vineyard. This first paragraph that we get after the first sentence is just full of jokes about how it's just sand, all beach with no behind. You know, people carry around pieces of wood like the original cross, because there's no wood on the island because there's like no trees. And they say that they like plant toadstools, mushrooms to have shade in the summer. It's just joking around. Great Ishmael farce. And then he tells the traditional story of how the island was settled by Native American Indians, and how I don't know what bird, an eagle swooped down, grabbed a baby, and so the parents sailed after it and found the island of Nantucket, and they found the skeleton of their baby. Very scary story. Again, more of Ishmael's knowledge of the world, especially Ishmael's knowledge of the non-Western world. I mean, I guess Native American culture is the Western world, but the non-kind of white person in America's world. And then we get these crazy stories of all the animals. You know, he describes the progression of Nantucketers. At first just scavenging barnacles timidly, and then they're going to try to hunt some cod, and then building their way up to hunting eventually. The most monstrous and most mountainous, that Himalayan, the salt sea mastodon, clothed with such portentousness of unconscious power that his very panics are more to be dreaded than his most fearless and malicious assaults. So Melville's taking after long lines of a poetic tradition of not mentioning the whale by name, and instead just giving it titles. And I mean, hey, if anyone's a sucker for that, it's me. And then, what a paragraph to end it. And thus have these naked Nantucketers, these sea hermits, issuing from their anthill in the sea, overrun and conquered the watery world like so many Alexanders. What a wonderful turn of phrase, like so many Alexanders. A quick note, all of these referential pieces that are locking together, that he draws from Ishmael's mind, Melville's mind, and Meshville. Maybe Meshville is the real person. It's so scattered, but in a great way, and he brings it all together. It makes you really feel like the whole world is just one connected thing. It's one of the great effects of this book. And then he'll get into a mood where it is all just nothingness, it's all crazy. But anyways, like so many Alexanders, parceling out among them the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, as the three pirate powers did Poland. Let America add Mexico to Texas, and pile Cuba upon Canada. Let the English overswarm, what a verb to use there, overswarm all India, and hang out their blazing banner from the sun. 2/3 of this terraqueous globe are the Nantucketers. For the sea is his, he owns it, as emperors own empires, other seamen having but a right of way through it. Merchant ships are but extension bridges, armed ones but floating forts, and even pirates and privateers, though following the sea as highwaymen the road, they but plunder other ships, other fragments of the land like themselves, without seeking to draw their living from the bottomless deep itself. The Nantucketer, he alone resides and riots on the sea. He alone, in Bible language, goes down to it in ships, to and fro plowing it as his own special plantation. There is his home. There lies his business, which a Noah's flood would not interrupt, though it overwhelmed all the millions in China. He lives on the sea as prairie cocks in the prairie. He hides among the waves. He climbs them as chamois hunters climb the Alps. For years he knows not the land, so that when he comes to it at last, it smells like another world. I mean, every sentence in this is just kind of interesting and beautiful in its own way. It smells like another world. I've never had that experience of coming back to Earth and it's smelling like another world. But he evokes it in me. More strangely than the moon would to an Earthsman. He goes to the moon. This is in the 1850s. Pretty cool. With a landless gull, and this wonderful, delicate, kind sentence to close out the chapter. With the landless gull that at sunset folds her wings and is rocked to sleep between billows, so at nightfall the Nantucketer, out of sight of land, furls his sails and lays him to rest, while under his very pillow rush herds of walruses and whales. Hello. A small little mellow cut for you there. I ran out of storage on my camera, so I formatted it, and now we're back. So we had that wonderful sentence about walruses and whales. And how pastoral is that? One thing that I want to point out is that Melville will occasionally, maybe not even occasionally, maybe a lot, he'll bring the language of earth and land and villages and smoke rising from chimneys into the open ocean. He'll bring them both together and kind of, I don't know, give you some sort of synergy and that really flourishes very well. So yes, that's a wonderful way to end that chapter with the walruses and whales. And then we get chapter 15, chowder, which is just delightful. And they essentially make it to the Tripod's Inn, because the landlord of their previous inn, the Spouter Inn, is cousins with this person, and he says, oh, of course, you can do no better than the Tripod's Inn. So we don't know that, but they go to the Tripod's, and it's pretty good. But then Ishmael sees this just outside the inn. These two big tripods. Tripods are like the Triworks giant metal casks that are used to render the blubber of the whale into oil. And we'll get into that later. But he sees them like as kind of stage props outside the inn. And he says, the horns of the cross trees were sawed off on either side, so that this old topmast looked not a little like a gallows. Perhaps I was oversensitive to such impressions at the time. Remember, it's a damp, drizzly November in his soul, so everything seems like gallows. But I could not help staring at this gallows with a vague misgiving. It's pretty funny. A sort of cricket was in my neck as I gazed up to the two remaining horns. Yes, two of them. One for Queequeg and one for me. It's ominous, thinks I. A coffin my innkeeper, Peter Coffin. A coffin my innkeeper upon landing in my first whaling port. Tombstone staring at me in the whaleman's chapter. And here, a gallows! And a pair of prodigious black pots, too. Are these last throwing out oblique hints touching Tophet? Now, I didn't know what Tophet was, so I looked it up. And it's an old biblical kind of allusion to the fact that maybe child sacrifices were happening, so very scary stuff. And then, of course, he meets the landlady at the time. The landlord's gone, so the landlady's been in charge, and she's just, awesome. Her name is Miss Hussey. And she says, okay, good to see you, boys. A clam or cod? And Ishmael says, what's that about cods, ma'am? I said with much politeness. Clam or cod, she repeated. A clam for supper? A cold clam? Is that what you mean, Mrs. Hussey? Says I. Oh, Miss Hussey. But that's a rather cold and clammy reception in the wintertime, ain't it, Miss Hussey? Ishmael the comedian. But being in a great hurry to resume scolding the man in the purple shirt, there's this guy outside in purple shirt causing trouble, who was waiting for it in the entry and seemed to hear nothing but the word clam, Miss Hussey hurried towards an open door leading to the kitchen, and bawling out, clam for two, disappeared. Queequeg, said I, do you think that we can make out a supper for us on one clam? However, a warm, savory steam from the kitchen served to belie the apparently cheerless prospect before us. And here we get a delicious passage. But when that smoking chowder came in, the mystery was delightfully explained. Oh, sweet friends, hearken to me. It was made of small juicy clams, scarcely bigger than hazelnuts, mixed with pounded ship biscuit and salted pork cut up into little flakes, the whole enriched with butter and plentifully seasoned with pepper and salt. Our appetites being sharpened by the frosty voyage, and in particular, Queequeg seeing his favorite fishy food before him, and the chowder being surpassingly excellent, we dispatched it with great expedition. When leaning back a moment and bethinking me of Miss Hussey's clam and cod announcement, I thought I would try a little experiment. Stepping to the kitchen door, I uttered the word cod with great emphasis and resumed my seat. In a few moments the savory steam came forth again, but with a different flavor, and in good time a fine cod chowder was placed before us. Wow, so good. And they move on, and then they go into their rooms, and Queequeg has to give up his harpoon because apparently a person was found dead in the room after a 4-year whaling voyage. In the room, has now been speared in the side, and how that happened, we don't really know. We get a hint at it later. And then, of course, in the morning, they order more clam chowder and cod chowder, both of it. And the note that I wrote down here was this. Whatever Melville wants to achieve, he can. He can do it. He can write it. He can make food delicious. He can make the action immediate. He can make his jokes funny. If he wants to do a certain thing, in this book, he can't fail, it seems. Now, what he wants to do, you might have an issue with. If Melville wants to talk about the classification of whales for a chapter, he'll do it and he'll do it well. But you might say, I don't want to hear about the classification of whales. I want to hear about the Pequod on this voyage. And to that I say, tough luck, buddy. Enjoy what we got. Anyways, chapter 16 is, I think, maybe the longest chapter we get so far. But we won't spend all that much time on it because it's very plot-driven. But there are a couple of gems in it, as there are throughout the book. But in this chapter, Ishmael is bequeathed the responsibility by, not Queequeg, but by Queequeg's little idol, Yojo, to go forth and find the ship on which they are to sail for the next 4 years of their life. Which is an interesting thing, because Queequeg knows a lot more about whaling than Ishmael does, and yet Yojo tells Queequeg that, you've got to give this new friend, the opportunity or something like that. There's a little great sentence about Yojo. He said, Queequeg placed great confidence in the excellence of Yojo's judgment and a surprising forecast of things, and cherished Yojo with considerable esteem as a rather good sort of god, who perhaps meant well enough upon the whole, but in all cases did not succeed in his benevolent designs. Which is a great way to describe a god. I mean, that's just so much of a more, I guess it's a human description of a god, which is not very godly, but of a god who has benevolent designs but doesn't really succeed. That's great. And then, Ishmael goes to the docks and he sees 3 ships. He sees one called the Devil Dam, one called the Titbit, and one called the Pequod. I'll give you 3 guesses as to which one he chooses. But it's an interesting thing there because it's like a Goldilocks and the 3 Bears thing, where the Devil Dam sounds just Devil Dam, it sounds like a hellish. Titbit, it means tidbit, like in a walk in the park, a cakewalk. It's like, too hard, too soft, Pequod. Mysterious, just right. So he chooses the Pequod. And then he also looks around them, and then we get this description of the Pequod that is really good. I won't spend too much time on it because it's kind of long, but I encourage you to, if you're not reading the book along with us and you want to get the description, go to chapter 16 to the ship and go to paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you'll get a great description of it. But I'll pick out one sentence. He said, her ancient decks were worn and wrinkled, like the pilgrim worshipped flagstone in the Canterbury Cathedral where Becket bled. Just again, calling forth this image of Becket bleeding. Somehow it's like a memory device. It's like the weird, unconnected images that are somehow connected that come up. I don't know how it arose in Melville's mind, but it gives me a sense of those ancient decks being worn and wrinkled, like that pilgrim worshipped flagstone. Anyways, there's whale bones adorning the whole craft. So, like the bow of the ship has these like whale backs. Maybe parts of the spine that are like teeth, and on the side rigging are actual whale teeth. Anyways, and there's not even a wheel. There's just a tiller. So that little kind of rod that is put back and forth that steers the direction port or starboard. This is a great final sentence on it. The helmsman who steered by that tiller in a tempest felt like the Tartar when he holds back his fiery steed by clutching its jaw, because it's made of a whale bone. So he's like clutching the jaw of a whale, like you would hold the jaw of a horse, I guess, in a fire. And then this final sentence, which is famous. A noble craft, but somehow a most melancholy. All noble things are touched with that. So again, it's the absolutist declaration of Ishmael that feels so cool. Is it totally true? I don't know, but it feels really good. It's a great artistic sentiment. Then we get a description of a man who's sitting in a whalebone wigwam on the deck of the ship. He comes out of it. There was a fine and almost microscopic network of the minutest wrinklings interlacing around his eyes. Have you ever seen that on a person with those wrinkles around the eyes, those crow's feet? I think they're lovely. We're in a culture right now that just hates every part of aging. But I think wrinkles around the eyes and crow's feet are a very attractive natural part of aging, and that most attempts that seek to thwart them make people kind of scary. But that's just my opinion. which must have arisen from his continual sailings in many hard gales, and always looking to windward. So he's always looking into the wind, and that's what creates these fine microscopic wrinkles. I love that. Just a great, again, piece of characterization. He asks, this is the captain of the Pequod, and this guy's name is Peleg, kind of backs and forths with him. And he says, kind of suspiciously, he says, Ishmael says, I've been on a merchant ship. I've never been whaling, but hey, I have a lot of experience on the sea. I've been on a merchant ship. And Peleg says, merchant service be damned. Talk not that lingo to me. Dost thou see that leg? I'll take that leg away from thy stern if thou ever talkest of the merchant service to me again. Merchant service indeed. I suppose, I don't know why I'm doing this accent, but we gotta go on. Commit. I suppose now you feel considerable proud of having served on those merchant ships. But flukes, man, what makes thee want to go a-whaling, eh? It looks a little suspicious, don't it, eh? Hast not been a pirate, hast thou? Didst thou not rob thy last captain, didst thou? Oh, the accent fell apart there. Sorry about that. Dost thou not think of murdering the officers when thou gettest to sea? I protested my innocence of these things. I saw that under the mask of these half-humorous innuendos, oh, this is an insight, this old seaman, as an insulated Quakerish Nantucketer, was full of his insular prejudices, and rather distrustful of all aliens, unless they hailed from Cape Cod or the Vineyard. So we get a wonderful description of him, but he is prejudiced. And Melville normally goes into the worlds of people's minds. He doesn't go into this one. He just says, this guy was kind of prejudiced, beyond the humor of it. And if that isn't the mask of prejudice all around the world, I don't know what it is. People being half joking about saying things about races and stereotypes and whatever, and then it's like that actually harbors beneath real prejudice. And the thing about prejudice is that it ends curiosity. It ends the exploration that this book is. So Melville wastes no time on it. But he goes forth at least with the conversation. And then Ishmael says, well, sir, I want to see what whaling is. I want to see the world. Want to see what whaling is, eh? Have you clapped eye on Captain Ahab? Who is Captain Ahab, sir? A first-time reader of Moby-Dick today can't read that sentence and not feel some sort of weight, some sort of gravity. But I guess a reader in 1853 wouldn't have known who Captain Ahab is. But maybe they would have, simply because of the name Ahab, which is biblical, which we're about to get to. And then Ishmael says, oh, I thought I was talking to the captain. And this Peleg guy says, oh, you're talking to Peleg. Belongs to me and a guy named Captain Bildad. And then Ishmael asks, well, Peleg says, clap an eye on Captain Ahab, young man, and thou wilt find that he has only one leg. What do you mean, sir? Was the other one lost by a whale? Lost by a whale? Young man, come nearer to me. It was devoured, chewed up, crunched by the monstrousest parmachetti that ever chipped about. Ah! So Ahab lost his leg to a whale. I'm sure you knew that. I know that. But it has to come somewhere. And it comes from this guy on the boat in a whalebone wigwam talking about it, and he describes it as being devoured, chewed, and crunched up. Pretty grisly. And he describes it also as monstrousist. He assigns some sort of quality to it. And Ishmael says, I was a little alarmed about his energy. Perhaps also a little touched at the hearty grief in his concluding examination, being the but said as calmly as I could, what you say is no doubt true enough, sir, but how could I know there was any peculiar ferocity in that particular whale? Though indeed I might have inferred as much from the simple fact of the accident. Immediately, as soon as Ishmael hears that this guy got his leg taken off by a whale, he says the obvious thing, or maybe not the obvious thing, but the good-natured thing of like, well, why is that whale such an a-hole? I mean, it just seems like he's just doing what whales do. Although it does seem kind of malicious just by the fact he did it. Very natural response. Look ye now, young man, thy lungs are sort of soft, d'ye see. Thou dost not talk shark a bit. Now, I looked this up and I couldn't find out. What does thou dost not talk shark a bit? My interpretation was that, like, you're not speaking sea language. You're speaking landlubber language. I won't have it. Or sure, you've been to sea before now, sure of that. And then he talks about the merchant service again. And then Peleg throws these sentences at Melville, at Ishmael, and like a little test. He says, very good. Now, art thou the man to pitch a harpoon down a live whale's throat and then jump after it? Answer, quick. I am, sir, if it should be positively indispensable to do so. Not to be got rid of, that is, which I don't take the least to be the fact. Good again. Now then, Thou not only wantest to go a whaling to find out by experience what whaling is, but you also want to go in order to see the world. Was that not what he said? I thought so. Well then, just step forward there, and take a peep over the weather bow, and then back to me and tell me what you see there. So he says, oh, you want to see the watery part of the world? Okay, go to the bow of the ship. Take a look. And then Ishmael goes forward. He says, glancing over the weather bow, I perceived the ship swinging to her anchor with a flood tide, and was now obliquely pointing towards the open ocean. The prospect was unlimited, but exceedingly monotonous and forbidding. Not the slightest variety that I could see. Well, what's the report? Said Peleg when I came back. What did you see? Not much, I replied. Nothing but water, considerable horizon enough, and there's a squall coming up, I think. Like a storm, squall. Well, what dost thou think then of seeing the world? Do you wish to go round Cape Horn to see any more of it, eh? Can't you see the world where you stand? I love that. Ishmael, and early in the book, sells it to us, says, oh, he wants to see the watery part of the world. It's like, yes, the watery part of the world. I want to see the watery part of the world. And then just goes and looks at it on the bow of the ship and he sees it. But of course, we know, at least if you've read this book, that's not true. The ocean has her moods. You can't just look out on the ocean and think you've seen it all. Anyways, and then we get a little description of how this boat is owned. It's owned by members of the community, of the Nantucket community, held by a crowd of old annuitants, widows, fatherless children, and chancery wards, each owning about the value of a timber head, or a foot of plank, or a nail or two in the ship. People in Nantucket invest their money in whaling vessels the same way that you do yours in approved state stocks, bringing in good interest. And that sentence is something I wanted to at least say something about, because as we go forward in the journey, we're going to be really invested in the characters on the ship. But it's important to keep in mind that other people have investments, literal investments on the ship, not only Peleg and Bildad, but orphans and widows who have a lot of money in this thing and are kind of living upon whatever profit this ship is going to make. It adds another layer of why it matters as we get into monomania. And he describes Bildad, who he sees, and he says, these same Quakers are the most sanguinary of all sailors and whale hunters, meaning Quakers, of course, being pacifists. They are sanguinary. They are fighting Quakers. They are Quakers with a vengeance. Amazing writing. Quakers with a vengeance. Incredible. And here, through the language of Peleg and Bildad, Melville introduces the thee, the thou hast. I guess I don't know if I even need to say this because I'm speaking to an awesome audience who probably knows a lot about language, but it's cool how English used to have an informal you in the way that, French has tu instead of vous, which is the polite form and also the plural you, or how German has the not impolite, but the informal du, like du hast is you have, whereas sie haben, sie would be the polite. So back in the day, English also had to, and you in English was the polite form. So like saying you are and conjugating the verb to be like are, you are, that's kind of the polite way to say it. Whereas to say thou hast would be the kind of informal way. Now today, because thou hast is so archaic sounding, it seems like it would be the more formal one, but back then it was, just the old one. But it's, the only reason I bring this up is to say that this archaic language, and even in 1852, you couldn't publish a whole book full of archaic language without explaining it. It would kind of come off as a little stilted and strange. But he pulls it off because he introduces us to these Quakers with all their thous and these and hasts and whatever. And we're going to spend a lot of time with thous and these and with Ahab and other sailors. And it's, I guess, a remnant of Quakerism of that old biblical language. But yes, we get later on this description of... it's just an incredible description of what it's like for a human who's a Quaker to be born and raised and bred in this world and how it shapes them. And he says, in childhood naturally imbibing the stately, dramatic thee and thou of the Quaker idiom. But then we get this. Still, from the audacious, daring, and boundless adventure of their subsequent lives, there being these Quaker whalers, strangely blend with these unoutgrown peculiarities, 1,000 bold dashes of character, not unworthy a Scandinavian sea king or a poetical pagan Roman. And when these things unite in a man of greatly superior natural force, with a globular brain and a ponderous heart, who has also by the stillness and seclusion of many long night watches in the remotest waters, and beneath constellations never seen here at North, been led to think untraditionally and independently. So escaping the circumstances of your own life, and you can kind of think for yourself. I mean, I felt like I came to consciousness after like getting out of my hometown. It's very strange. Receiving all nature's sweet or savage impressions fresh from her own virgin, voluntary, and confiding breast, and thereby chiefly, but with some help from accidental advantages, to learn a bold and nervous lofty language, the language of sailing. That man makes one in a whole nation's census, a mighty pageant creature, formed for noble tragedies. Nor will it all detract from him dramatically regarded, if either by birth or other circumstances he have what seems a half-willful, overruling morbidness at the bottom of his nature. For all men tragically great are made so through a certain morbidness. And then this, another famous sentence. Be sure of this, O young ambition, all mortal greatness is but disease. Whoa. I'm not going through this book speaking as if you've read the whole thing. So I won't go forth and say what this could or could not foreshadow. But I'll only say keep that in your head. All mortal greatness is but disease. An interesting idea. Is it Melville's only idea about greatness? No, he has other ideas, but it's an interesting one. And then he gets into the paradox of Quakerism with whaling. I mean, I haven't even gone into this yet. I'm planning on, my own sermon on how awful whaling is as a thing later on. I haven't even mentioned it because I've just been trying to, in essence, excite you about the joys of Moby-Dick. But needless to say, the subject matter of this book is one of the most vile economic practices that has ever existed. The ruthless, barbaric slaughtering of some of the most intelligent creatures that exist on the earth. I mean, it's like hunting humans. It's hunting people with cultures and language, maybe even whalehood. Whales have a special kind of cell that porpoises, great apes, elephants, and humans have. We're the only animals that have it, that group. And they're called spindle cells, and they regulate deep emotions like empathy and suffering and all of these things. I mean, killing a whale is just... It's a horrific atrocity in the way that it was done then. Of course, it was an economy then when it was the way to light the world. So it's not excusable, but it's explicable in the world of Moby-Dick. It's not explicable today. Whaling today doesn't really have explanations outside of Native American, or not even Native American, but Native Islanders having rights to whaling for cultural reasons. I'm not even sure that that's a valid reason to continue doing it. I mean, if it were weaving, if it were art making, preserving a natural heritage and culture of people is important. But how can we live in a world where this is happening? It's crazy. Anyways, perhaps you disagree, but I think that whaling is pretty abominable. And Ishmael will get into it. And there's a curious thing about Quakers participating in that. Though a sworn foe to human bloodshed, he's talking about Bildad, yet had he in his straight-bodied coat spilled tons and tons of Leviathan gore. How now, in the contemplative evening of his days, Bildad is retired, and he has all the time in the world to think about all the suffering he's caused. How now, in the contemplative evening of his days, the pious Bildad reconciled these things in the reminiscence I do not know, but it did not seem to concern him much. And very probably he had another famous sentence, he had long ago since come to the sage and sensible conclusion that a man's religion is one thing, and that this practical world quite another. Wow. I'll leave you to think about that. And I'll pretty much skip this page, but basically Ishmael's trying to figure out what's his rate. You basically get a percentage of the ship's earnings, called a lay. So like you'd get the one out of 200th lay, which means whatever the net profits of the ship is, you get a 200th of that, or 300th or whatever. And of course, the higher up on the ranking you are, the leg goes down in the number, then from 200 to 90, but of course that means a greater share. And then this curious thing happens where Peleg asks Bildad, "Well, Captain Bildad, what do you say? What lay should we give this young man?" "Thou knowest best," was the sepulchral reply. It was this kind of gloomy reply. The 777th wouldn't be too much, would it? I mean, just like nothing. You get one out of 777 of all the profits. Ishmael says, like, if I could just even pay for the clothes that I wear out on the journey, that would be enough. With that's terrible. And then Peleg responds in this way: "Why, blast your eyes, Bildad, thou dost not want to swindle this young man. He must have more than that." So they're doing this back and forth thing. They're arguing, and I'm thinking all the while, are they swindling Ishmael? Are they by pretending to argue? Maybe they are really arguing, and it works as a scene if they are really arguing. Peleg rushes at Bildad. There's this comic scene, but after the first rush, and Bildad swiftly sidesteps him, just rushes past like a rhino. Bildad doesn't even move. He's not even afraid of him, and Peleg is just tuckered out. It's like, all right, we're gonna give him the 200th lay, or the 300th maybe. And it's just a nice comic scene, but nothing that we'll spend too much time on. But then something does happen. It's very interesting. Ishmael wants to see Captain Ahab. He asks Peleg. And Peleg says, "You can't see him. He won't even really see me." He says, "I don't know exactly what's the matter with him, but he keeps close inside the house, a sort of sick, and yet he don't look so. In fact, he ain't sick, but no, he isn't well either. Anyhow, young man, he won't always see me, so I don't suppose he will thee. He's a queer man, Ahab. So something, but a good one. And without like him well enough..." What is this accent? "Without like him well enough, no fear, no fear. He's a grand, ungodly, godlike man, Captain Ahab. Doesn't speak much, but when he does speak, then you may well listen. Mark ye, be forewarned. Ahab's above the common. Ahab's been in colleges, as well as among the cannibals. Been used to deeper wonders than the waves." What a sentence. Been used to deeper wonders than the waves. Prose poem, I guess. "Fixed his fiery lance in mightier, stranger foes than whales." Mightier, stranger foes than whales? What could that be? Kraken? "His lance, aye, the keenest and the surest that out of all our isle. Oh, he ain't Captain Bildad, no, he ain't Captain Peleg, he's Ahab, boy, and Ahab of old. Thou knowest was a crowned king." The biblical Ahab. And Ishmael says, "And a very vile one. When that wicked king was slain, the dogs, did they not lick his blood? Come hither to me. Hither, hither," said Peleg, with a significance in his eye that almost startled one. "Look ye, lad, never say that on board the Pequod. Never say it anywhere. Captain Ahab did not name himself." So Ahab's name is, pertains to a biblical story where he was maybe it was Eliyahu, the prophet Elijah, I can't remember, who foresaw that this wicked king, it'd be someone in his house was defenestrated and he was cast out and the dogs licked his blood. Terrible ending. So kind of a cursed name in a sense. And then we get how Ahab's crazy widowed mother gave him this name. Wow, this is just fascinating. And he says, "I know what he is, a good man. Not a pious good man like Bildad, but a swearing good man, something like me. Only there's a good deal more of him. Some humility in Peleg. I know that he was never very jolly, and I know that on the passage home he was a little out of his mind for a spell, but it was I think this is an Irish accent. I think that's why that's happening, but whatever. I like the discernment. But it was that sharp shooting pains in his bleeding stump that brought that about. As anyone might see, I know too that ever since he lost his leg that last voyage by that accursed whale, he's been a kind of moody, desperate moody, and savage sometimes, but all that will pass off. And once and for all, let me tell thee and assure thee, young man, it's better to sail with a moody, good captain than a laughing bad one. So goodbye to thee, and wrong not Captain Ahab, because he happens to have a wicked name. Besides, my boy, he has a wife, not 3 voyages wedded, a sweet, resigned girl. Think of that. By that sweet girl, that old Ahab has a child. Hold ye then there can be any utter hopeless harm in Ahab? No, my lad, stricken blasted if he be. Ahab has his humanities." So Ahab has a wife, he has something tethering him to earth, so don't be too worried about it. As I walked away, I was full of thoughtfulness. What had been incidentally revealed to me of Captain Ahab filled me with a certain wild vagueness of painfulness concerning him, and somehow at the time I felt a sympathy and a sorrow for him, but for I don't know what, unless it was the cruel loss of his leg. And yet I also felt a strange awe of him, but that sort of awe which I cannot at all describe was not exactly awe. I do not know what it was, but I felt it, and it did not disincline me towards him. though I felt impatience at what seemed like mystery in him, so imperfectly as he was known to me then. However, my thoughts were at length carried in other directions, so that for the present, dark Ahab slipped my mind. So we have this phantom figure in the book now, Ahab. We haven't seen him, but we're hearing about him. And it grows. Anyways, Ishmael in the next chapter goes back to the tripod's inn, and he left that morning, leaving Queequeg in this kind of fast, or this Ramadan, where Queequeg is sitting kind of hunched up on his hams. And he leaves him that way, and then he comes back, and he can't open the door. The door's locked. And he looks through the keyhole, and he can see the harpoon. And he thinks, apoplexy! Queequeg's bust an artery or something, and is dying, or is dead. And he tells the landlady and explains it to her, and then she cries out, "He's killed himself," she cried. "It's unfortunate Stig's done over again. There goes another counterpane." Hilarious. There goes another quilt. "God pity his poor mother. It'll be the ruin of my house. Has the poor lad a sister? Where's that girl? There, Betty. Go to Snarls the painter. Tell him to paint me a sign with 'No suicides permitted here' and 'No smoking in the parlor.' Might as well kill two birds with one stone." I love that. "Kill? Ah, the Lord be merciful to his ghost. What's that noise there? You, young man, avast there!" Avast meaning stop. And running after me, she caught me as I was again trying to force open the door. And she says, "I won't allow it. She, don't burst down my door. We're just going to get a locksmith." And he says, Ishmael says, I love this. "Have to burst it open," said I, and was running down the entry a little for a good start, when the landlady caught at me, again vowing I should not break down her premises. But I tore from her, and with a sudden bodily rush, dashed myself against the mark. With a prodigious noise, the door flew open, and the knob slamming against the wall sent the plaster to the ceiling. And there, good heavens, there sat Queequeg, altogether cool and self-collected, right in the middle of the room, squatting on his hams, still holding Yojo on top of his head. He looked neither one way nor the other, but sat like a carved image, with scarce a sign of active life. So while they're freaking out outside, Queequeg is still just kind of in his fast, sitting perfectly still, Yojo on his head. He's been doing that all day. That's got to be really hard. I also love that there sat Queequeg altogether cool and self-collected. If there are any Robert Service poetry fans, doesn't that ring of the cremation of Sam McGee? There sat Sam looking cool and calm in the calm of the furnace roar, or in the heart of the furnace roar. I love that poem. I would highly recommend reading The Cremation of Sam McGee on a cold winter's evening if I were you. Anywho. And then he basically can't rouse Queequeg, and before he goes to bed, he puts his bearskin jacket over him, which was a very touching scene. And he said it was kind of hard to fall asleep because, there's this guy just kind of just stiffly sitting there in the room, and you kind of like see him trying to fall asleep, kind of wigs the guy out. But somehow I dropped off at last, and I knew nothing more till break of day, when looking over the bedside, there squatted Queequeg, as if he had been screwed down to the floor. But as soon as the first glimpse of sun entered the window, up he got, with stiff and grating joints, but with a cheerful look, limped towards me where I lay, pressed his forehead again against mine, and said his Ramadan was over. Now that's devotion. And and Ishmael tries to convince Queequeg, "This is foolishness, my man. You can't be doing this. This is just dumb." He says, "Now, as I before hinted, I have no objection to any person's religion, be it what it may, as long as that person does not kill or insult any other person." But even this he has to go into, and he says, "I argued, fasting makes the body cave in, hence the spirit caves in." Whoa, interesting notion. Many would disagree with that, but that's Ishmael's thought. "And all thoughts born of a fast must necessarily be half-starved." That's hilarious. "This is the reason why most dyspeptic religionists cherish such melancholy notions about their hereafters." In other words, how people who just keep fasting and starving themselves and making themselves miserable think that there is such thing as a miserable, hellish afterlife. "In one word," Queequeg said I, rather digressively, "hell is an idea first born on an undigested apple dumpling, and since then perpetuated through the hereditary dyspepsias nurtured by Ramadans." Hilarious. And Queequeg, of course, he won't have it. He's like, "You just don't understand," which is hilarious. He said, he looked at me with a sort of condescending concern and compassion, as though he thought it a great pity that such a sensible young man should be so hopelessly lost to evangelical pagan piety. At last we dressed, and Queequeg, taking a prodigiously hearty breakfast of chowders of all sorts, so that the landlady should not make much profit by reason of his Ramadan, we sallied out to board the Pequod, sauntering along and picking our teeth with halibut bones. Again, a great segue paragraph to close that out. And I love that he's, Queequeg's looking at him thinking, well, you're just a lost poor soul, just like Ishmael is. So it's great. The next chapter is called His Mark. He takes Queequeg to the ship, and he's a harpooner, and they didn't know that this guy that Ishmael was bringing along was a savage, and they're like, well, is he converted? And Ishmael he says, oh yeah, he's converted to the first congregation, deacon, whatever, and it's just kind of BSing, and then eventually they ask Queequeg, he calls him Quahog, or whatever your name is, did you ever stand at the head of a whaleboat? Did you ever strike a fish? Without saying a word, Queequeg, in his wild sort of way, jumped upon the bulwarks, from thence into the bows of one of the whaleboats hanging to the side, and then, bracing his left knee, posing his harpoon, cried out in some such way as this, Captain, you see him them small drop tar in water there? You see him? Well, suppose him one whale eye. Then, whew! And taking sharp aim at it, he darted the iron right over Bildad's broad rim, clean across the ship decks, and struck the glistening tar spot out of sight. So Queequeg throws that harpoon, it goes over pious Bildad's head, and and this is what Peleg says. He says, quick, Bildad, quick, I say you, Bildad, get the ship's papers. We must have Quahog in one of our boats. Look you, Quahog, we'll give you the 90th lay, and that's more than was ever given a harpooner yet out of Nantucket. So we went into the cabin, and to my great joy, Queequeg was soon enrolled among the same ship's company to which I myself belong. So he proves his worth. And then moving forward, we get, Bildad tries to earnestly convert Queequeg, and Peleg says, don't try to convert this guy. He says, Avast now, spoiling our harpooners. Pious harpooners never make good voyagers. This is great. It takes the shark out of them. You can't have a religious harpooner. Very interesting. We'll see that when we get to the Pequod. Or at least a good harpooner. No harpooner is worth a straw who ain't pretty sharkish. There was young Nat Swain, one of the bravest boat header out of all Nantucket in the Vineyard. He joined the meeting, and he never came to good. He got so frightened about his plaguey soul that he shrinked and sheered away from whales for fear of afterclaps in case he got stove and went to Davy Jones. So there was once a noble, bold whaler who, once he joined the meeting, once he kind of became a Christian, kind of started to be afraid. Peleg and Bildad are just great foils to one another. Bildad brings up how, don't you think of death when you're in a gale? Don't you think of the afterlife? And Peleg says, I don't think of death when I'm in the gale. I think of life. I think of how I'm going to get my ship to harbor. And after having this exchange of these foils, we get this. Bildad said no more, but buttoning up his coat, stalked on deck where we followed him. There he stood very quietly, overlooking some sailmakers who were mending a topsail in the waist. Now and then he stooped to pick up a patch, or save an end of the tarred twine, which otherwise might have been wasted. That is just great writing, a great way to end a paragraph. It's so, or a whole chapter, it's somber, and it's good characterization, of course. He just kind of absentmindedly looks around at his nature, he sits bolt upright everywhere to save his coattails. And in the next chapter, this weird guy named Elijah comes up to them and says, have you shipped in that ship? And he's giving them all these ominous forebodings. This chapter is, needless to say, called The Prophet. And he says, have you signed your souls? And then Ishmael's like, what? And Elijah says, oh, perhaps you haven't gotten any, he said quickly. No matter, though. I know many chaps who haven't gotten any. Good luck to them. And they are all the better for it. A soul's a sort of fifth wheel to a wagon. Wow, what a perspective. And I'm wondering, did this description of this crazy prophet create kind of the stereotype that I grew up with in like movies and Disney cartoons where there's like the main character is going through the forest and then like a weird twitchy person comes out and says, don't go to the woods, there's danger there, and beware of the swamp of blah blah blah, and they're fading into the darkness while the main character is like, what did you say, what? But the crazy prophet is fading away. That's like the quintessential cliche. I wonder, I mean, it may not have originated here, but I wonder if that popularized it. Anyways, and Elijah keeps being ominous, and he says, it's all very well. I like to hear a chap talk that way when Ishmael rebukes him. You are just the man for him, the likes of you. And Ishmael's just the man for Ahab. Morning to you, shipmates, morning. Oh, and when you get there, tell him I've concluded not to make one of them. What does that mean? I've concluded not to make one of them. Excuse me. And Ishmael says, my dear fellow, you can't fool us that way. You can't fool us. It is the easiest thing in the world for a man to look as if he had a great secret in him. That called me back to like being on the playground and kids would pretend to have big secrets just so they could keep it from one another and feel like, I don't know, having a big secret raises you above other people and you're in this kind of hierarchy and you know something that the other people don't know. This is the reason I think why conspiracy theories are so popular and are psychologically infectious, is that people love, maybe not love, but that feeling of, I know something that y'all don't know. Some people just, that is so powerful and they can't get away from it. They can't get enough of it. They have to be kind of in this in-group of knowing. And then Elijah leaves. But this interaction sparks something in Ishmael that's really interesting. He said, this circumstance, coupled with his ambiguous, half-hinting, half-revealing, shrouded sort of talk, now begat in me all kinds of vague wonderments and half-apprehensions, and all connected with the Pequod, and Captain Ahab, and the leg he had lost, and the Cape Horn fit, and the silver calabash, and what Captain Peleg had said of him when I left the ship the day previous, and the prediction of the squaw Tistig, and the voyage we had bound ourselves to sail, and 100 other shadowy things. Just fascinating. And then, in the next chapter, the last chapter that we'll talk about this episode, we basically get them, it's called Alistair, just boarding the ship with a million things. And here's just a fascinating description. How can a frickin' whaling vessel stay on a ship for 4 years? Well, here's a clue. Everyone knows what a multitude of things, beds, saucepans, knives and forks, shovels and tongs, napkins, nutcrackers and whatnot, are indispensable to the business of housekeeping. Just so with whaling, which necessitates a 3 years' housekeeping upon the wide ocean, far from all grocers, costermongers, doctors, bakers, and bankers. And though this also holds true of merchant vessels, yet not by any means to the same extent as with whalemen. For besides the great length of the whaling voyage, the numerous articles peculiar to the prosecution of the fishery, and the impossibility of replacing them at the remotest harbors usually frequented, it must be remembered that of all ships, whaling vessels are the most exposed to accidents of all kinds, and especially to the destruction and the loss of the very things upon which the success of the voyage most depends. Hence the spare boats, spare spars, and spare lines and harpoons, and spare everything almost, but a spare captain and a duplicate ship. So there's just spare everything, and because everything is going to break down, you're going to have to replace it. And it takes some MacGyvering, as we'll see later on. And then we get a great description of this woman who's Captain Bildad's sister, and she brings pickle jars, and she brings boards and quills for the first mate's deck and everything, or his writing desk. And he says this, never did any woman better deserve her name, which was Charity. Aunt Charity, as everybody called her. And like a sister of Charity did this charitable Aunt Charity bustle about hither and thither, ready to turn her hand and heart to anything that promised to yield safety, comfort, and consolation to all on board a ship in which her beloved brother Bildad was concerned, and in which she herself owned a score or two of well-saved dollars. And there's 2 points about this. One is that Melville has no shame whatsoever in just naming people with like on the nose names. Jonah being the bartender's name, Elijah the prophet, Aunt Charity. Not afraid of it at all. But it's a genial kind of determinism. It's like he said in chapter 1, Looming. So the fates who are kind of cajoling him into thinking he's making these decisions for himself. That runs throughout, and Aunt Charity has that. So that's point one. The second point I want to make is just to make a farewell to all female characters, because we're not going to see any more female characters after Aunt Charity. So we got the landlady, Miss Hussey, we got Aunt Charity, and that's it. Bye-bye. Besides, of course, the white whale, which represents femininity itself, as we all know. And so they're preparing, and then we end today's discussion, reading, what have you call it, of our read-along of Moby-Dick, with this wonderful, ominous description. Ishmael hasn't seen Ahab yet, and he's starting to feel that he wishes he could see the captain who's about to be his commander. He says, if I had been downright honest with myself, I would have seen very plainly in my heart that I did but half fancy being committed this way to so long a voyage without once laying my eyes on the man who was to be the absolute dictator of it, so soon as the ship sailed out upon the open sea. But when a man suspects any wrong, it sometimes happens that if he already be involved in the matter, he insensibly strives to cover up his suspicions even from himself. And much this way it was with me. I said nothing, and I tried to think nothing. At last it was given out that sometime the next day the ship would certainly sail, so next morning Queequeg and I took a very early start. Wow. That is That is dark. Oh, so saucy. And what an amazing insight, again, to just human nature. How often is it that people with good business intentions get caught up in ginormous complex schemes of fraud or Ponzi schemes or whatever it is, just because they have a stake in it and they try not to think about it, try to just cover it up, just push it away, suppress it. It's a very interesting point, and I find that all of the biggest mistakes of my life, and probably most people's lives, stem from something along these lines of like, I'm already in this, I'm just going to pretend it's sort of not happening, it's going to be fine, when something in me knows is saying, oh, you got to stop. I like to think I don't do that too much now, but I have like strong childhood memories of doing that. If I was in a group project with a person and they like cheat on it, I never really cheated in school. It just wasn't my personality. But if they did, it would terrify me. But I didn't want to snitch. And then now I have to cover it up because I'm involved in it. And then I just feel guilty. It's like that feeling. It's just so potent and powerful. But we haven't seen Ahab yet. We only get the ominous foreboding. And that ends today's discussion. What did you think? Email me if you have any ideas. I'd love to hear them. I think that these chapters do a great job of establishing what just needs to be established expositionally about the story, preparing for it, explaining what we're doing, who the characters are, but already growing something, growing a feeling, a deep power is rumbling through this story. Maybe it's the biblical names, maybe it's just the quality of the writing. Do you feel that? I definitely am feeling that already. And pretty soon we're going to set sail and we're going to say goodbye to land, at least within the narrative. He'll be talking about episodes on land and whatnot, but for the most part we're going to be on the open ocean and in the open ocean of Ishmael's mind. So yes, that's chapters 11 through 20. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you're having a wonderful time reading this book, or if you're following along and not reading, I hope you're enjoying this. I know these videos are rather long, but it's Moby-Dick, it's the best book ever. So, I thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you next time for chapters 21 through 30. And until then, stay safe, stay hydrated, enjoy life. Waking up every day is amazing. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Yay! Okay, I'm done.